Of course. Here's part one of your story, written in a natural, human-centered tone around 1,400 words. It's engaging, emotional, and simple enough for spoken narration on YouTube, following your exact style and policy guidelines. It was one of those mornings when the city felt both alive and empty at the same time. Cars rushed by, horns echoed between tall buildings, and people walked fast with coffee cups in their hands. But on the corner bench near the old bus stop sat a man who didn't seem to belong in all that noise. His coat was worn, his boots scuffed, and beside him was a faded backpack with an American flag patch sewn on the front. The man sat quietly, holding a paper cup of cold coffee. His eyes looked far away, as if he wasn't really seeing the street but something much deeper, something from long ago. To most people passing by, he looked like another homeless man trying to get through another cold morning. But this man had once worn a uniform, once stood tall under a flag that now seemed just a piece of cloth on his bag. His name was David. David had been living on the streets for almost 2 years now. He didn't beg. He didn't shout. He just kept to himself, moving from place to place, finding small jobs when he could, cleaning a parking lot here, washing windows there. The nights were the hardest, especially when the wind cut through the alleys, but David had learned to survive. That morning, he hadn't eaten in 2 days. The last of his coins went to that cold coffee. His stomach growled, but he tried to ignore it. Across the street, a small grocery store caught his eye. It wasn't fancy, just a corner shop with old posters on the windows and a bell that jingled whenever someone went in or out. He sat there for a while, watching people go in, buy things, and leave with plastic bags full of food. He wasn't jealous. He just wished for a single meal. Not much, just something warm to quiet his hunger. After a while, he got up and crossed the street slowly. Inside the shop, the smell of fresh bread hit him like a wave. His mouth watered, and he had to stop himself from breathing too deeply. He walked past the shelves, not touching anything, just looking. The owner, a middle-aged man behind the counter, noticed him right away. "Hey, you gonna buy something?" The man said sharply. David nodded politely. "Just looking, sir." "Don't take too long," the owner replied, his tone cold. David looked down, embarrassed, and kept moving. He picked up a bottle of water and a small sandwich from the refrigerator. He checked his pocket. 2 coins, not enough. He sighed, put the sandwich back, and walked toward the door. As he stepped outside, something fell near the trash bin. It was another sandwich, still wrapped, probably dropped by someone in a hurry. He bent down, picked it up, and looked around. Nobody claimed it. He smiled faintly, whispering a quiet thank you to whoever left it behind. But before he could walk away, the store owner rushed out, yelling, "Hey, I saw that. You stealing from me again?" David turned, confused. "No, sir. This was on the ground. Don't lie to me," the man snapped. "You think you can walk in here, take my food, and walk out like nothing?" A few people stopped to watch. David tried to explain, but the store owner was already calling the police. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived. They looked at David, then at the sandwich in his hand. "Sir, put that down," one of them ordered. David did as told. "Officers, I didn't take it from the store. It was outside." "You can check. Let us handle it," the taller officer interrupted. "You're under arrest for theft and trespassing." People gathered around, whispering. Some took out their phones. David didn't resist. He'd learned long ago that arguing only made things worse. He just lowered his head and said quietly, "I understand." They cuffed him right there on the street. The cold metal bit into his wrists. The sandwich lay on the ground beside him, untouched. At the station, David sat on a hard bench while the officers filed their reports. The younger officer looked at him with mild pity. "You got a record, sir?" "No, son. Just a service record," David said softly. The officer frowned. "Military?" David nodded once. "Army, long time ago." The officer looked away awkwardly. "Well, you'll have a hearing tomorrow. Maybe the judge will go easy on you." David smiled faintly. "Maybe." That night he slept in a holding cell with 2 other men. One kept mumbling in his sleep. The other snored loudly. David lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the years that had passed, the medals, the uniforms, the friends who never made it back. He remembered his mother's proud smile the day he left for boot camp. She had believed he'd change the world. Now he couldn't even change his own luck. He whispered a quiet prayer, not asking for freedom, just peace. The next morning, They took him to court. He walked in slowly, wearing the same jacket, the same torn boots. People in the courtroom turned to look at him. Some shook their heads, already judging him. To them, he was just another homeless man who got caught stealing. The public defender assigned to him barely looked at the file. She leaned over and said, "Don't worry, we'll try for community service or dismissal if you cooperate." David nodded. "I'll cooperate, ma'am." "Good, just keep quiet unless the judge asks you something." He didn't argue. He wasn't used to being heard anymore. The courtroom buzzed with small talk until the clerk called, "All rise." Everyone stood. The judge entered, a woman with a calm face and firm eyes. She looked through her papers, not paying attention to the room just yet. David watched her for a moment, then looked down at his hands. He noticed the old scars from years of service, the same hands that once carried a rifle, now shaking slightly from age and cold. The hearing began. The prosecutor stood and started listing charges: petty theft, trespassing, refusal to leave the store. David listened quietly. When it was his turn to speak, his lawyer nudged him. "State your full name for the record," she said. He stood slowly. David Carter, ma'am." The judge froze. Her pen stopped moving. She looked up suddenly, eyes narrowing. "I'm sorry, can you repeat your name?" "David Carter," he said again softly. For a moment, the entire courtroom went silent. The judge's face changed, and something like disbelief mixed with recognition. She stared at him as if seeing a ghost from her past. The clerk glanced around, confused, but no one dared to speak. The judge leaned forward, studying his face, his eyes, his posture. "Mr. Carter," she said slowly, her voice trembling just slightly. "Where did you serve?" David hesitated. "Afghanistan, ma'am. 15th Infantry Division. Retired 12 years ago." The judge took a deep breath and leaned back in her chair. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. The courtroom waited, sensing something unusual was happening. Then in a quiet voice she said, "Court will take a brief recess." The gavel hit the sound block and everyone began whispering. The bailiff led David to a side room, confused about what just happened. His lawyer looked surprised too, but David simply followed orders as always. In the hallway, people whispered about the judge's reaction. Some thought she recognized him from another case. Others guessed there was a mistake. But the truth was something no one in that room could have imagined. Inside her chambers, the judge sat still, staring at the wall. Her assistant asked if she was all right. She nodded slowly and whispered, "That man, he once saved my life." But out in the hallway, David didn't know any of that. He just sat quietly on a bench, his head bowed, the same way he had sat years ago, waiting for orders, waiting for something to change. He didn't know why the judge had reacted that way. He didn't even remember her face. He only knew that somehow fate had brought him here. Again, in front of someone who saw only what the world made him look like, not who he truly was. And as the courtroom doors closed behind him, the city outside kept moving, busy, noisy, unaware that inside that small courthouse an old wound from the past had just been opened. For the first time in years, David felt something stir in his chest. Not fear, not hope exactly, but a feeling that maybe his story wasn't over yet. Maybe, just maybe, someone still remembered who he used to be. Would you like me to continue with part 2, the first court hearing, next? In the same tone and length, around 1,400 words, ready for upload formatting? The next morning, the courtroom was quieter than usual. The sound of shoes on the polished floor echoed through the hall as people took their seats. The air carried that heavy mix of paper, old wood, and tension that every courthouse seemed to have. David sat in the corner, still wearing the same old jacket. His hands rested calmly on his knees, though deep inside, his mind was anything but calm. The public defender sat beside him, flipping through the thin file that held his case. She spoke softly without looking up. "The judge wants to continue the hearing today. Don't worry, just stay respectful and answer only what she asks." David nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He didn't say much more. He never did. The door opened and the bailiff called for everyone to stand. The judge entered again, the same one from the day before. But this time her face wasn't just calm and professional. There was something in her eyes, a quiet storm she was trying to hide. She looked directly at David as she sat down. "Good morning," she said, her tone steady but softer than before. "Good morning, Your Honor," David replied quietly. The prosecutor stood up first. He was young, confident and clearly saw this as an easy win. Your Honor, this is a simple case of petty theft. The defendant, Mr. Carter, was caught in possession of a sandwich taken from a local grocery store. The store owner has filed a statement, and there's security footage as well. He spoke like he had said the same words 1,000 times before. To him, it was just another small case in a long day. David listened without interrupting. His lawyer whispered, "It's okay, they have to go through the formal process." The judge looked through the file slowly, her eyes scanning the pages but not really focusing. She already knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary case. She could still hear his name echoing in her mind. David Carter. When it was time for the defense to respond, David's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client maintains that he did not steal the item in question. He found it outside the store, and there's a possibility that the accusation was a misunderstanding. The prosecutor smirked slightly. That's convenient, he said under his breath, loud enough for people to hear. The judge shot him a warning look. Let's keep this professional, counselor. The courtroom fell silent again. David sat there quietly, eyes on the floor. He wasn't angry or nervous. He had learned long ago that staying calm was the only way to survive, in war, in life, and now in this courtroom. Then the judge leaned forward and spoke directly to him. Mr. Carter, please tell the court in your own words what happened that day. David hesitated. Speaking wasn't something he did much anymore, but when he finally looked up, his voice was low and steady. I was sitting outside the store, ma'am, he began. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I went in to look, but I didn't have enough money. When I came out, I saw a sandwich on the ground near the trash bin. It was still wrapped. I picked it up. I thought it was nobody's. That's when the store owner came out and accused me. He paused for a moment. I didn't argue, ma'am. I've learned that sometimes it's better to stay quiet. The judge nodded slightly, her expression unreadable, but something in her eyes softened. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Even so, Your Honor, the store owner claims he saw the defendant leave the store with the item. That's why he called the police. The judge turned to him. We'll verify that through the footage. Do you have it available? Yes, Your Honor. The bailiff set up the small screen on the desk. The footage began to play. It showed David entering the store, walking slowly past the shelves, picking up a sandwich, then putting it back. A few seconds later, he walked out empty-handed. The next part of the footage, bound from the outside camera, showed him bending down near the trash bin, picking up something. The judge leaned closer. Pause there, she said. The frame froze, and everyone could clearly see David picking up the sandwich from the ground. The room went silent again. The prosecutor looked uncomfortable. Perhaps the angle doesn't show. It shows enough, the judge interrupted firmly. The defendant didn't steal anything. The store owner, sitting in the back row, shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor tried to recover, flipping through his papers. Well, even if that's the case, Your Honor, the defendant still trespassed. The judge raised a hand. That's enough, counselor. She looked back at David. You may sit down, Mr. Carter. He nodded politely and sat. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes glistened slightly just for a second. The judge took a slow breath, then spoke in a calm but serious tone. Mr. Carter, I'd like to ask you a personal question, and you can choose not to answer if you wish. Were you in the military? David looked surprised, but answered, Yes, ma'am. I served for 15 years. Infantry division. Retired after an injury. The judge stared at him for a moment, the courtroom fading into the background. She could see it now, the same eyes, the same calm strength she had seen years ago. She remembered a stormy night, a broken car, and a man in uniform who had stopped to help a frightened young woman. She remembered his kindness, his patience, and the way he told her, Don't give up on people, even when they give up on you. She blinked, pulling herself back to the present. Mr. Carter, she said softly, can you please remain after this hearing? I'd like to speak with you privately. David hesitated but nodded. Yes, ma'am. The rest of the courtroom looked puzzled. The prosecutor sat down quietly, unsure of what to say. The judge then turned to him. Given the new evidence, I see no grounds to continue this case. All charges against Mr. Carter are dismissed. A murmur ran through the room. The prosecutor frowned but said nothing. The judge struck her gavel. Court adjourned. David stood slowly, unsure of what to do. His lawyer gave him a small smile. You're free to go, Mr. Carter. Congratulations, he nodded. Thank you, ma'am. But as everyone began leaving, the judge called out, Mr. Carter, please stay for a moment. He stopped and turned. The bailiff led him to the judge's chambers while everyone else filed out. The door closed behind him, leaving the busy noise of the courtroom outside. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter, softer. The judge removed her robe and stood near the window for a long moment before turning around. "Do you remember me?" she asked finally. David looked at her carefully, trying to place her face. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't think so," she smiled faintly. "It's all right. It was a long time ago. You helped me once when my car broke down near the highway. You gave me your jacket and fixed my tire in the rain." David blinked, trying to recall. Then slowly his eyes widened. "That was you? The young woman with the red car?" She nodded, smiling softly. "Yes, I never forgot that day. You told me something that stayed with me all these years." David frowned slightly, searching his memory. "What did I say?" "You told me never give up on people, even when they give up on you." He let out a quiet laugh, almost in disbelief. "I said that?" "Yes," she said. "And it changed my life. I was ready to quit law school then. That night I decided I wouldn't give up. I became a lawyer. And eventually, a judge." David didn't know what to say. For a long time he just stood there, looking down at his hands. "I don't know what to say, ma'am," he finally whispered. "I didn't do much." "You did more than you realize," she said gently. "You showed me what true kindness looks like. And now it's my turn to make sure you get the help you deserve." He shook his head. "I don't want anything, Your Honor. I just want peace." "You've earned that," she said softly. "But you also deserve a chance to live with dignity again. There are programs for veterans, housing, counseling, job assistance. I can make a few calls." David hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know." The judge smiled. "No, Mr. Carter, it means more than you know." As he left her chambers, the hallway felt different, brighter somehow. The same city waited outside, the same cold streets, the same noise. But for the first time in a long while, David felt that maybe his story wasn't finished yet. Maybe this wasn't the end of his road, but the start of something new. And as the judge watched him walk away, she whispered to herself, "The world may forget its heroes, but fate never does." Of course, here's part 3 of your story, written in a simple and natural human tone, about 1,400 words. It keeps the flow emotional, grounded, and engaging while fitting your YouTube-safe storytelling style. When David stepped out of the courthouse that day, the air felt different. The same city sounds surrounded him, the honking cars, the footsteps, the chatter. But something inside him had shifted. He didn't quite understand it yet, but it felt like a small door had opened somewhere deep in his chest, letting in a bit of light he hadn't felt in years. He walked down the courthouse steps slowly, holding the few papers they had given him, the official notice that his case was dismissed. To anyone else, it was just a document. To David, it was freedom. The judge's words echoed in his head. "You helped me once." He still couldn't believe it. After all these years, someone had remembered him, and not for his mistakes, but for a moment of kindness he'd nearly forgotten. He walked to the small park across the street, sat on a bench, and looked up at the sky. The clouds were thick, heavy with rain. He smiled quietly. It seemed the sky was reminding him of that storm years ago, the night his path had first crossed with hers. It had been more than 20 years ago. He was still in the service then, on leave for a week before deployment. The rain had poured all night, the kind that soaks through your clothes no matter how fast you run. He had been driving along a deserted road when he saw a car pulled over on the shoulder. The headlights were flickering and someone was standing beside it waving for help. When he stopped and stepped out, a young woman stood there shivering, trying to fix a flat tire on her own. She couldn't have been more than 22. "You all right, ma'am?" he had asked, his voice calm and kind. She looked startled at first, then relieved. "I can't get the lug nuts off," she'd said, embarrassed. The wrench slipped and now the rain's making everything worse. He'd smiled, taken off his jacket, and placed it over her shoulders. "You stay in the car where it's warm. I'll handle it," she hesitated. "I can't let you do that." "You can," he'd said gently. "And you should." He worked in the pouring rain, fixing the tire while she watched through the window. When he was done, he handed her the wrench and said, "You'll be fine now. Take care of yourself, all right?" Before she could even thank him properly, he was already walking back to his truck. She had rolled down her window and called out, "What's your name?" He turned and smiled. "David Carter, ma'am." Then he was gone. Now, sitting in the park after all those years, He finally understood why the judge had looked at him the way she did. It wasn't just recognition. It was gratitude. As he sat there lost in thought, a voice interrupted him. "Mr. Carter?" He turned and saw a young man in a suit holding an envelope. "The judge asked me to give this to you," he said politely. "It's about some programs that might help." David took the envelope, nodded his thanks, and the man left. Inside was a small note in neat handwriting. "Mr. Carter, you once gave a stranger your coat and your time. I can't forget that. Please come by my office tomorrow morning. I want to help you start again. Judge L." David held the note for a long time. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket right over his heart. For the first time in years, he had something to look forward to. The next morning, he went back to the courthouse. The guard at the door recognized him and waved him through with a kind smile. "She's expecting you, sir." Inside her office, the judge stood by the window, dressed in plain clothes this time, not her robe. When she turned around, her face was warm and gentle. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I wasn't sure if I should," he admitted. "Didn't want to cause any trouble." She shook her head. "You could never cause trouble, Mr. Carter." They both sat down. For a few seconds, the room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. Then she spoke softly. "I've thought about that night so many times," she said. "I was lost, and not just on the road, but in my life. I was struggling to believe I was good enough to finish law school. You didn't know me, but you helped me anyway, and you said something I've carried with me ever since." David smiled faintly. "I told you not to give up on people." She nodded. "Yes, those words shaped who I became. Every time I faced a hard decision, I remembered your voice. You believed in people when you had no reason to." David looked down at his hands. "I guess I used to. Somewhere along the way, I forgot how." She leaned forward. "Then let's help you remember." She explained that she'd already contacted a Veterans Outreach Center, a place that helped former soldiers find housing, medical care, and counseling. They were expecting him later that afternoon. David listened quietly. "I appreciate that, ma'am. I really do, but I don't want special treatment. I just want a fair chance," the judge smiled. "That's all you'll get. A fair chance." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." She hesitated, then said softly, "David, may I ask what happened after you left the service?" He sighed, his gaze distant. "It's a long story, ma'am. I came home after my injury. My leg was bad, so I couldn't stay in the Army. My mother passed not long after. I tried finding work, but things got harder. I lost my place, lost friends, and eventually, I stopped trying. I thought maybe this was just what life had left for me." The judge listened quietly, her eyes full of sympathy. "I'm so sorry," she said. He smiled faintly. "No need to be sorry. I made my choices. I just didn't think anyone remembered who I was anymore." "Well," she said softly, "I do." There was a long pause, and then she stood up. "Come on," she said. "Let me drive you to the center myself." He looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said firmly. Outside, the sky had cleared after last night's rain. The sun shone faintly through the clouds, making the wet streets glimmer. They drove quietly, neither of them speaking much. For David, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. For years he had been invisible. Now, someone saw him. When they arrived at the Veterans Center, a kind-looking woman met them at the door. "You must be Mr. Carter," she said warmly. "We've been expecting you." Inside, the place was simple but welcoming. Walls lined with photos of soldiers, a coffee station in the corner, and small groups of veterans talking softly. Some were missing limbs, some walked with canes. Others just sat quietly like him. The judge spoke with the coordinator privately for a few minutes, then returned. "They'll help you with housing first," she explained. "Then they'll check your health and see if you qualify for benefits." David nodded, a bit overwhelmed. "I don't know how to thank you, ma'am." "You already did years ago," she said gently. He didn't argue. He just smiled and said, "Maybe it's time I give that jacket back to you." She laughed softly. "Keep it. It suits you better." Over the next few weeks, David slowly began rebuilding his life. He got a small room at a nearby shelter and began attending counseling sessions. The other veterans welcomed him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Every few days, the judge would stop by quietly, bringing coffee or books. They talked about life, about faith, about how one moment of kindness could change everything. One evening, as they sat outside the center watching the sunset, she said, "Do you ever think about the people you served with?" "All the time," David said softly. "Some of them didn't make it. Some did, but they're still fighting battles no one can see." She nodded, understanding. "I think that's true for all of us. We all have battles people can't see." He looked at her and smiled gently. "Maybe that's why we meet the people we do, to remind us we're not fighting alone." She didn't answer right away. She just smiled back, eyes glistening in the fading light. That night, as David walked back to his room, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because he knew someone believed in him again. And deep inside, he knew that the storm that once brought two strangers together had done more than just fix a flat tire. It had connected two lives in a way neither of them could ever forget. Sometimes, he thought, life had a strange way of circling back, to remind us that even the smallest act of kindness can echo across decades. And somewhere, deep in his heart, David whispered, "Maybe it's not too late to start again." Would you like me to continue with part 4 next, where the truth unfolds in court and the redemption begins, in the same style and tone? Of course, and here's part 4 of your story, written in a heartfelt, human-centered tone with natural flow around 1,400 words. It continues the story of David's quiet redemption, the truth coming to light, and the emotional bond between him and the judge. Weeks had passed since that first visit to the Veterans Center. Life was still not easy for David, but it was better, steady, quiet, and filled with small moments of hope. Every morning he woke up in a small room that smelled faintly of coffee and soap instead of cold pavement and rain. For the first time in years he had a bed, a door that locked, and people who greeted him by name. He spent his days volunteering at the center, sweeping floors, helping other veterans fill out paperwork, and talking to newcomers who still carried the same look of defeat he once wore. The staff said he had a calming presence. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Sometimes, when the sun began to set, he would step outside and sit on the wooden bench near the entrance. He'd watch the orange light fade over the city skyline and think about how strange life could be, how one moment of kindness could circle back years later and save a life. The judge still visited him once or twice a week. She never came in as a judge. She'd show up in a simple sweater and jeans, bringing coffee or small boxes of food from a local cafe. She always greeted everyone politely, but she and David shared a quiet connection that didn't need many words. One afternoon, she arrived while David was helping an older veteran fix a broken chair in the lounge. She smiled as she walked in. "You're becoming the handiest man in this place," she said jokingly. David smiled faintly. "Old habits, ma'am. When you live on the streets, you learn to fix things with whatever you have." She nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's what life's about, fixing things, one piece at a time. They sat together later with coffee, talking about small things, the weather, the center's improvements, and the upcoming Veterans Day event that the city was planning. But then the judge grew quiet. "David," she said slowly, "I've been thinking. The way your case was handled wasn't right. The store owner accused you without evidence. That's not justice. I want to clear your record completely." He frowned slightly. "You already dismissed the charges. Isn't that enough?" She shook her head. "Not quite. The accusation is still there in the system. It says you were charged even though you were proven innocent. That's not fair to you." David looked down, thoughtful. "I don't care what the system says. I know the truth. That's enough for me." The judge leaned forward gently. "Maybe. But there are people out there who will never look past that record. They'll see the wrong version of you, and that's what I can fix." He studied her face for a moment. "You've already done so much. I don't want to take more of your time." She smiled softly. "You gave me my time back 20 years ago. You don't get to argue with me on this." David laughed quietly. "Yes, ma'am." The next week they were back in court, not for a trial, but for a hearing to officially clear his record. The courtroom looked different this time. There was no crowd, no noise, just a few officers, the judge, the store owner, and David sitting calmly beside his lawyer. The store owner looked uneasy. He hadn't expected things to go this far. When the judge entered, everyone stood. She sat down, her face calm but serious. "Today we are here to review the case of Mr. David Carter," she began. After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that he was wrongfully accused and that the initial report contained false statements. The store owner stood nervously. Your Honor, I didn't mean— The judge held up her hand. Sir, you accused a man without proof. You made assumptions based on how he looked, not what he did. Do you understand the damage that caused? The man's face turned red. I was just trying to protect my business. From what? She asked firmly. From a hungry man picking up food from the ground? He lowered his head, unable to respond. The judge continued. Mr. Carter served this country. He risked his life so that people like us could live in safety. Yet when he needed understanding, he was met with suspicion and humiliation. That's not justice. That's failure from all of us. The room was silent. Even the officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. David sat quietly, eyes lowered, hands folded in front of him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even thinking about the man who had accused him. He was thinking about all the others, the men and women still out there on the streets, invisible, judged, and forgotten. The judge took a breath and spoke again. This court officially expunges all records related to this case. Mr. Carter, you stand fully cleared in the eyes of the law and in the record of this city. David looked up slowly. His eyes glistened. Thank you, ma'am, he said quietly. The judge nodded once, her voice softening. No, Mr. Carter, thank you. The store owner approached him afterward, nervous and ashamed. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I judged you wrong. I didn't see who you really were. David looked at him for a long moment, then simply said, It's all right. Just try to see people differently next time. The man nodded and walked away. After the hearing, the judge invited David for coffee at a small cafe near the courthouse. It was the same kind of place she used to sit and study years ago, back when she was just another law student with big dreams. They sat by the window, watching the rain start to fall outside. The silence between them was peaceful. I hope today gave you some closure, she said softly. David nodded. It did, more than I expected. He sipped his coffee and smiled faintly. You know, I used to think the world forgot me, but maybe it was just waiting for me to remember who I was. She looked at him thoughtfully. Who are you, David? He smiled gently. A man still learning how to live. The judge smiled back, her eyes warm. That's a good answer. As the weeks went on, David began spending more time helping others. He spoke to younger veterans at the center, telling them that one mistake or one bad day didn't define their lives. He helped organize small events and even started a group for those struggling to adjust to civilian life. People respected him, not for his past, but for his calm, steady presence. One evening, as the Veterans Center prepared for the upcoming Veterans Day event, the judge arrived again carrying a framed object wrapped in brown paper. What's that? David asked curiously. She smiled. A little something I wanted to return to you. He carefully unwrapped it. Inside was his old military coat, cleaned, repaired, and placed behind glass with a small plaque underneath that read, For the man who never stopped serving, even when the world stopped seeing. David stared at it for a long moment, his eyes full. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Just say you'll keep going, she said gently. He nodded. I will. When Veterans Day arrived, the center was filled with people, families, veterans, volunteers, and even reporters. David didn't expect to be part of the ceremony. He was just there to help. But halfway through the event, the judge took the microphone and smiled toward him. There's someone here today who reminds us what true strength looks like, she said to the crowd. It's not medals or ranks. It's compassion. It's humility. It's courage that doesn't fade, even in silence. Please join me in honoring Mr. David Carter. The audience turned toward him, clapping. David stood awkwardly at first, not knowing what to do. Then he smiled, a quiet, humble smile, and raised his hand slightly in thanks. Later that evening, when the event was over, he stood outside watching the crowd leave. The city lights shimmered across the street, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. The judge walked up beside him. You did good today, she said softly. I didn't do anything, he replied. Just lived long enough to see kindness come back around. She smiled. That's doing more than you realize. They stood there in silence for a long moment, watching the lights reflect off the wet pavement. The air was cool, and the smell of rain carried memories of another night long ago. The night he gave away his coat and unknowingly changed 2 lives. Sometimes, he thought, life wasn't about what you lost, but about what you gave, and how it found its way back to you when you least expected it. Would you like me to continue with part 5 next? The emotional final chapter showing his complete redemption, new purpose, and the lasting impact of his story, in the same warm and human tone?